Fellow Rotarians, welcome to the April 9th meeting of the Lexington Rotary Club. We know it's spring in Kentucky, not only because of the change in weather and the change in the scenery, but it's also NCAA basketball championship time. We always know our team has a shot at bringing home a national championship, and it's time to shake off the winter doldrums when the NCAA tournament begins. This year's different. It's different in so many different ways, but one of the things that's really odd is not having the ability to sit at home, watch the games, and cheer on our Wildcats. Did you realize that this past Monday night we should have been watching Kentucky play in the national championship game? And we know, and Cal definitely knows, that we would have won our 9th championship. But 42 years ago this week, Jack Goose Givens scored 41 points in the national championship game for Kentucky in one of the greatest performances ever in NCAA tournament history. He had a night where when he received a pass, everyone knew that he was going to find an opening for a jump shot, and everyone knew that the ball was going in. We're excited to have Jack Givens with us today. He's going to talk a little bit about his performance, what it's like to play in the NCAA, talk about growing up in Lexington, and really excited to have Jack Givens. He really needs no introduction, but I'll tell you a little bit about him and then we'll turn the program over to Jack. Jack went to Bryan Station High School. He was Mr. Basketball in 1974, and he attended UK and graduated from UK with a degree in business administration. He's the 3rd leading scorer in UK basketball history. I told you about his championship performance game, provided a lot of excitement to our fans. Also, little known fact, it's not on his resume, but he also participated in our Rotary Club Dancing with the Stars in 2011, which we're most appreciative of. So Jack Givens is going to be our program for today. And Jack, just to get started, I want to ask you a few questions real quick with a lightning round.
Sure.
These will surprise you a little bit. Just give a 1 or 2 word answer and then we'll turn it over to you. Who, in your opinion, was the best player you ever played against, Jack?
Well, I've played against some pretty good players over the years. I mean, if you think about guys like Larry Bird, Dr. J, Magic Johnson, played against all of those guys. But probably the guy that was as tough for me to guard as anybody I've played against is a guy by the name of Bernard King, played down in Tennessee. The Ernie and Bernie show, a lot of our folks will remember Ernie and Bernie. But Bernard King was like a scoring machine. He could, he had a tremendous first step. He kind of shot his jump shot on the way up, so it was tough getting to timing to kind of time when to go up to try to block his shot. But he was just a tremendous offensive player, tremendous player.
Right. What was the worst defeat you've ever experienced on the court?
Probably the first time we played IU up at IU, my freshman year. We had what turned out to be a finals type team. We made it to the NCAA finals that year, but we played IU up at their building. They beat us every way you could possibly be beaten. I mean, the score was, and I think it was like 24 points they beat us. But the score was probably the least of the least worst way we got beaten that night. Physically, they just beat us up. Got all the way to the point when Bobby Knight slapped Coach Hall in the back of the head. The only game I've ever played in where we came this close to having a brawl. I mean, I'm talking about bench clearing. I mean, it was just an ugly game for us. But that was kind of the game that got us going and forced us to change our approach to games. And as I say, we did have an opportunity to play IU again later in the year, and we beat them in the finals of the Mideast region, which was in the same year one of the worst and one of the best victories we've ever had. So I'd say that Indiana game up at IU was the worst loss I've ever had.
One more quick question, then I'll turn the entire program over to you. What is one word you could use to describe Coach Hall, or one brief description of Coach Hall?
You mean as a player or now as a grandfather?
Both, I guess.
a lot of the one words that I could use, I probably couldn't use on this, but Coach was underappreciated for as good a coach he is. I mean, I think over time people realized that he was a really good coach. At that stage of the game, it was soon after he had taken over for Coach Rupp. A lot of people wasn't real happy about Coach Rupp being gone. They weren't real happy about Coach Hall being the guy who took over. So he had a lot of convincing to do. So I think underappreciated. His talent as a coach was underestimated. I think over time he proved that, but at that time, if I had to narrow it down, he was underappreciated by Kentucky fans.
Why don't you take over and tell us about the ball game? Tell us about that game in '78. Set the stage.
Yeah.
How it worked out. We know the outcome.
Yeah.
Great performance, but just tell us what it was like.
Well, I think if you think back to that season as a whole, you have to just kind of know some of the stuff that was going on. I mean, we were described by the national media as a team that had no fun. We were accused of brutalizing the game because we had a training program that was just breaking edge. I mean, teams at that time believed lifting weights and getting big and getting stronger would hurt basketball. You wouldn't be able to shoot the basketball. You're too big to move. all of those things that people were saying back in those days that are kind of routine now, we kind of implemented. We kind of got all that going. So our method of training was different. So the national media, they just beat us down, said we had no fun, we played under a lot of pressure, the fans were expecting too much. Everything negative that could be said was said about us at one point during that season. We were ranked number one at the beginning, we ended up number one at the end, and because of that, a lot of people changed their whole way of thinking. But leading into the NCAA tournament, we had won the SEC. We had a great team. I mean, Rick Roby, Mike Phillips, James Lee, and myself were seniors on that ball club. But we had a real mix of great players. I mean, players who really knew how to play. It's so much different than today. We had seniors, we had experience in every class, where now you have one and dones, and those kind of people, I mean, those kind of teams we had just don't exist anymore at Kentucky. As we marched through that tournament, we kind of got a contribution from a different guy pretty much every game. If you think about it, the first game we played Florida State down in Knoxville, and Florida State had us down at halftime. Coach Hall comes in, and obviously he's not real happy, says some choice things to primarily myself, a couple other guys, so he didn't start me in the second half. He didn't start Truman Claytor, he didn't start Mike Phillips. Brought guys off the bench who played really well, and that was kind of how we won that game. We finally got things turned around, took control of that game, and won, going away at the end. But that was certainly an unusual way, and a big move by Coach Hall to start those bench guys and take some of us out of the starting lineup. The second game, Miami of Ohio, we played those guys, and Mike Phillips, who was from Ohio, played great that game, was really good, stepped up, had a 20-some point game, I think it was, for Mike. So we got that contribution. We played Michigan State, who had Magic Johnson and a lot of other really good players, but we played them. Cal Macy made some big free throws down the stretch, and that was a close game against a very good team. But we needed Cal Macy to step up. He handled the ball. He ran the offense perfectly. He got fouled down the stretch, and he made a lot of big free throws in that game. Then we get to the Final Four. We play Arkansas, who had some really good players, Sidney Moncrief, Malvin Dell, some of those kind of guys who were just tremendous players. I played well in that game, scored 20-some. Rick Roby played well in that game. Macy did another great job of running the offense and got us shots where we needed them, so that was tough. So we had some other guys step up. And then the final game against Duke, of course, a lot of people, everybody talks about the 41 I had, but Roby had a double-double, 20-plus points, and Macy once again ran the offense, gave up a lot of shots to get the ball to me because that is where the weakness was in the Duke defense. So we had to do that. We got pretty good play off the bench again. A lot of guys stepped up. Jay Shidler came in that game, and although he didn't score a lot, Jay played really well, filling in some big minutes for TC, and when he got in a little foul trouble. So it was a fun March. It was interesting March through the tournament. It was interesting because we got great contribution from a lot of different guys. But that was kind of how that team was all year. We had people step up. We had a lot of experience, a lot of good young players, and once again, you don't see that very often anymore in Kentucky because of the one and done stuff. But it was a fun march through the tournament.
Okay, Jack, let's talk about how the game's changed a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
When you played, there wasn't a three-point shot.
Right.
I think they just re-implemented the dunk shot a couple of years before you.
We could dunk. James Lee was very good at that.
Yeah, and the game's changed a lot with the one and done and things like that. How you got to practice all the time, for instance?
Yep.
Now they limit the practices. How is it different in today's game than what you observe?
Well, there's so many differences. The thing that influences the game, in my opinion, as much as anything, is AAU basketball. We didn't have AAU. We learned through high school basketball. We learned from, for the most part, from coaches who knew how to teach fundamentals. I think one of the biggest differences now is that guys coming into college are not as fundamentally sound as we were. I mean, I watch some of these guys play now, and the basic stuff, screening out. Hardly ever do you see a guy screen out anymore. It's like, hey, I can jump over you, so I'm going to go. If you jump over me, you get this one. I mean, they at some point dribbling the ball like this went to dribbling the ball like this, which gives the offensive player a huge advantage because you can carry that ball and get you to where you want to go without dribbling it as much. So there are a lot of differences, but I think another big difference is just what I talked about, the lack of experienced players, at least here at Kentucky, when it comes to tournament time, because I think above everything else at tournament time, experience is probably the most important thing. When I look at brackets, one of the first things, and try to pick brackets to see where some upsets might be, one of the first things I look at is what experience does the point guard on that team have? Is it a freshman who is just kind of learning the college game? Or is it a senior who's been there and they've been in the tournament 3 years? And then I look at the forwards. Do they have a 6'7" or 6'8" power forward, a big dude who can beat up people, knock people around, who know how to play, who has that kind of experience? Those are the things that I look at that are really different now, particularly when you talk Kentucky basketball or teams, even Duke or some of the others that deal a little bit with the one and done. That experience factor, particularly those last 3 weeks of the season, is huge. So we don't have much of that anymore.
Being a Division I basketball player on scholarship is a full-time job.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of hours. Some of the players come in from backgrounds where they don't have a lot of money to live on.
Right.
Do you think the NCAA should consider some type of compensation for the players?
Oh, absolutely. And I've said this a long time. I mean, when I was in school, you talk about the money the guys get now as opposed to then. We got a whole lot of money at that time. A total of $15 a month is all we got. They called that laundry money. Fortunately, I was from right here in Lexington. I could take my clothes home and my mom did my laundry. But a lot of guys didn't have that, but you know, they expect you to live on $15 a month. That's crazy, but absolutely, I think players should be compensated. I don't know what it is. I don't know how to get to that, but everybody seems to be making money except the players. And I know people who I've heard it a million times, and yeah, but you're getting a degree. Yeah, you're getting a degree, but you tell me a degree I can get that's going to help me make $5-6 million a year like these guys make. I mean, there's not a degree that coming out of college you're going to make that. So I don't want to hear about the degree, because I can get if I'm making $5 million, and if I want a degree, I can get a degree on my own. So yes, absolutely, I think the players should be paid something, compensated something. If I can go down the street and Jamie, I can come to your place and you set up a table like we're at now, and you have your customers, your clients come in and I can sign autographs, and you pay me $500 to come in for 2 hours signing autographs. I should be able to do that because it's no burden on the school. So there are many, many ways to do that. For those who say, yeah, but Kentucky can do it and Eastern can't. I love Eastern, but that's too bad for Eastern, that they don't have the following that we might necessarily have. I mean, and I say Eastern, I could say Notre Dame, I could say Duke, I could say any school in the country, but if a player has the ability to generate his own money by giving of his time to come and sign autographs, go down to the bank, go to the car dealer, and sign autographs, you benefit from it, so why shouldn't the players benefit from it? That's my thinking on that. I hope it comes to that. I don't know if it ever will.
What about the immediate transfer rule? If you go to a school, you don't like the coach, not working out, coach goes somewhere else. Do you think that makes sense for players?
I think it does. I think it does. I mean, if Coach Calipari thought maybe he could make more money with the Cleveland Cavaliers or with the Duke or with Louisville or anywhere else, he could leave and immediately come eligible to coach next season. So why shouldn't that player have the same right to come in? And if things don't work, if it looks better on the other side, why shouldn't that player be able to go and find out and be able to play immediately? I'm all for it. I don't necessarily want a guy to transfer. It takes time, but I certainly understand Johnny Juzang on this team from last year. I mean, he saw an opportunity to, number one, get back closer to home, number two, to maybe get more playing time. Why shouldn't I have the right to do that? Now, I wouldn't want to see that guy transfer 2, 3, 4 times over a 4-year career, no. But if he can do that one time, give the kid the opportunity to do that.
Okay. What about your recruitment process? I know that was 42 years ago. Things have changed.
Yeah.
But what would you tell tell us a little bit about what it was like to be recruited by Coach Hall and come to UK. Of course, you knew the program being here. But tell us a little bit about your process and what you might tell a kid today.
I told Coach Hall, James Lee, who went to Henry Clay, I went to Bryan Station. I told Coach Hall that James and we were the easiest recruiting that he ever did, because every game we played, I don't care if it was in Lexington, if it was in Hazard, if it was in Pikeville, if it was E-Town, if it was up North Carroll County, I don't care where we played. Every game we played, particularly my junior and senior year, was filled with blue and white. I mean, and every one of those fans in those games were saying, we want you. We need you in the blue and white. We need you at Kentucky. And at that time, even more than 42 years ago, when I was being recruited, it wasn't so easy for me as an African-American kid growing up in the projects. And it wasn't as easy for me at that time to say, yeah, I want to go to Kentucky. Because when I was growing up and looking at Kentucky and trying to figure when I thought I was good enough to go to college and play somewhere, there was no one at the University of Kentucky I could look at that looked like me. where I could say, I want to be like him, you know. I mean, I don't have blonde hair and blue eyes as much as I like Tom Parker. I didn't look like him, so the opportunity in my mind wasn't necessarily there for me to go to the University of Kentucky. So it wasn't easy. And at that time, the only time I'd been out of Lexington was on the school bus going to play basketball somewhere at some gym. And with some of the things I was hearing, going to places like Hazard or wherever, wasn't necessarily all that flattering. So only when I went there and I saw people who didn't look like me cheering for me, and saying, we want you at Kentucky, that's how I found out that, hey, this may not be so bad, even though we don't have a lot of guys there that look like me. So fortunately, all that changed, and it's an easier decision now than it was at that time. But I tell Coach Hall, I was easy process for him because he didn't have to convince me. I got convinced every night. But I would tell kids, though, because at that time I could go to as many schools and visits as I wanted to. I would tell guys to make sure you make a visit to some other schools. As my junior and senior year, as set as I was on going to the University of Kentucky, I still look back at it and wish I had gone to some other visits at some other big schools to see what it's like other places.
Let's go back to Coach Hall. He's in his 90s.
Yep.
He was a hard taskmaster, I'm sure. I went to a couple of practices.
Oh, yeah.
I saw him with the blocking dummies and the way he
Oh, man, yeah.
treated the players.
Thanks for bringing that up and those memories. It's great.
What was it like in those practices? I mean, I guess he adopted a lot of Coach Rupp's philosophies, too.
Well, the thing I tell people about our practices is that the games were a vacation. We looked forward to the games because we didn't have to go against each other in practice every day. I mean, just think about it. Going against James Lee every day, we played the same position. So he and I had to bang heads against each other every day, and James wasn't easy. We had just unbelievably tough practices. They wanted it that way. They were of the mindset that if you play like this in practice, you're going to play like this in games, and we certainly did. We were a physical team. We learned in practice how to defend without being called for a lot of fouls, how to be physical by being fundamentally sound, screening out, setting screens, all those things that add to the physicality of the game. We did that every day in practice. Coach Hall was one of those coaches that if you did not max out on effort on every play, he had certain ways to teach you to max out the next time, and they weren't always good. But practices were brutal at times. But it carried over into the games, and that's why I say we look forward to the games just to get away from having to practice against each other every day. But that's how we played. That's how he expected it to be, and we enjoyed it very much.
Let's close with one more question. And first of all, I want to thank you for coming in.
Oh,
This has
sure.
been a great
Enjoy it.
discussion.
Oh, enjoy it.
But tell us what it felt like when you won that game. The fans, I know they tore the airport up.
Yep, yeah.
What it was like coming back a champion and having such a huge game.
You know, I tell people, you know, my freshman year, we finished second. We lost in the final game to UCLA. You know, it was John Wooden's last game, and played it in San Diego. I think had we played it anywhere else than in the state of California, we would have won that game. And I thought that was wonderful. I mean, I thought couldn't get much better, couldn't get any better than that, finishing second that year. But the difference between finishing second and finishing first is unbelievable. We did have a lot of pressure on us that year. It had been 20 years since the last time Kentucky had won a championship. It was time, in the minds of a lot of people. But we went through all of that. We played great basketball the whole year, having lost just 2 games. It was just one of those feelings that is hard to verbalize. I will say this: when the horn sounded and we were on top, it just felt like just tons of weight had been lifted off of our shoulders. There's no question about that. We wanted it, but we brought all of that pressure on us, all of that desire to win. We brought all of that on ourselves. It was, at that point, it wasn't Coach Hall driven. It was player driven. Now, Coach Hall took a lot of heat, and I'll always love him for doing that. He took all the heat, saying it was all on him, but it was player driven. We as seniors set the tempo for everybody else on the team. If you didn't follow, you got left behind. We had a whole team of followers who looked forward to playing under that kind of pressure. But I remember walking off the floor. We had cut down the nets. I had around my head, around my neck, I had my blue hat on and cowboy hat. We were walking off the floor, headed back to the locker room finally after an hour celebration and stuff on the court. We were walking back and Coach Hall just came out of nowhere and he put his arm around me and he said to me, he said, "You see now what all that screaming I did at you and cussing you, and you see now what all of that means as you're walking off the floor." And I looked at him. Before I could answer, he cut away as fast as he came up, because I don't know if he wanted to hear what I was going to say. I think we could have gotten there without some of the screaming. Maybe needed some, but without some of it. But it's a great feeling. And the good thing is, even after all this time, 42 years ago, we're still talking about the championship. And that's something that will never go away.
Thank you very much, Jack.
Yes.
It's been a great program.
Thank you. Thank you.